if you if you can it's on mute. Okay, cool. Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks for coming. Yeah, today is our last day. Oh, it's a last day of our 2 weeks SICSS program, and today we are very delighted to invite Dr. Kokil Jaidka, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Communications and New Media at NUS. So Kokil is a superstar in computational social science. She is a very prolific scholar who has published in Nature, Human Behavior, Journal of Communication, and GOC, along with other very premium computer science conference proceedings. So today we're very lucky to welcome her. So just a little some brief background of Kokil. Dr. Kokil Jaidka, she has a background in computer science and engineering. So she had her bachelor's degree in engineering and PhD in information studies. She also worked as a research scientist at Adobe before she joined NUS as an assistant professor. So Kokil, her research lies at the intersection of computational models of persuasive and argumentative language, as well as the computer science side of language modeling and linguistics. Okay, so her work has been published in a variety of top-tier journals and conference proceedings. So yeah, it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Kokil Jaidka, and let's join me in welcoming Dr. Kokil. Also a special mention that it's 5 a.m. in the morning from Kokil's time. So yeah, let's thank her. And Kokil, take it away.
Thank you so much, Renwen, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but this is the next best thing that I get to be a part of SICSS this way with you all. Congratulations on a successful SICSS. I hope you had a wonderful journey. I'm here to stir things up a bit, talk to you about perspectives, new perspectives, old perspectives, problems that you may have encountered or discussed with your colleagues, and tell you a little bit about how I solved them. Much of this talk focuses on social media data, focuses on found data. So not all of your projects are using found data, but there are still ways or ideas that you could use from here in your work. So Renwen's already given a great introduction. Thank you so much. There are basically what I consider to be 3 parts of my career. I mean, the 3 different experiences gave me experience in 3 different aspects of my career. The computer science aspect and being at NTU and University of Pennsylvania during my graduate studies and postgraduate studies gave me insight into methods for computational social science. So I would consider this to be the methods aspect of my career so far. Digital marketing at Adobe Research gave me insight into applications. So how to apply those methods into real world applications. And now being at NUS, being an assistant professor at NUS has given me insight into how to build theoretically motivated arguments. So research, so methods, applications, and theory. I've managed to do a little bit of everything in the past X number of undisclosed number of years. At NUS, I run the social media online behavior and language project. It's a group of people who work on their thesis or on passion projects related to social media analysis and research. Here are some of them. Mainly the focus of my work as a part of this project and in general in my career is once again on methods, applications, and theoretically motivated arguments. I'm going to briefly show some slides which illustrate some of the main papers I've done in these three areas. As I said, methods, applications, and theory. So these are the methods, recent methods papers, or the ones that I'm most proud of, I guess. They all involve language models. They involve um, understanding how language correlates with text characteristics, for instance. Those are the ones on this slide. Yesterday, I believe, yeah, all the days are melding into each other. But this is the most recent paper that was out. It's a conference proceedings paper, which talks about the quality of online political talk. This is a PNAS paper, which compares or benchmarks different language models against each other for predicting county level outcomes. And this is a data set annotated with supportiveness, so annotated with text characteristics, basically. So these are kind of my methods papers where I focus on the quality of language and how it relates with real world outcomes. Applications focuses even more closely on outcomes and less on the modeling. So here, for instance, I looked at how to model editors' behaviors on Wikipedia. All of the articles you see on this page are basically about argumentation and the application of text to understand argumentation. And at NUS now, more recently, I've been looking into theoretically motivated arguments. The three papers you see on the screen right now are all papers from premier um, journals and conferences, and they all focus on the US context. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about this in 5 minutes from now. But if you want insight into any of the ideas that I mentioned, or in general, if you think that looking at observational data or experimental data is relevant to your work, you might find these papers insightful. I'm not saying I'm the only one working in these areas. So I would request you to do your due diligence when you explore research related to methods. And when you're looking at research related to South Asia, don't forget all the conference proceedings that are putting out new methods and new resources to understand the language of social media in the region. So why should you listen? I already talked a little bit about this, or I briefly hinted that I would be talking about this. A lot of my papers do focus on different study contexts in South Asia, but a lot of them also, or the most successful ones, focus on the US. And that's unfortunately the reality that in order to have a successful paper about a South Asian context, you need to be extremely creative, you need to be extremely rigorous, and you often need to triangulate your methods because it's harder to convince reviewers who are not familiar with a new context what your research is about. Now, I did some snooping, and I know some of the projects that you all are working on. So I have tailored this talk according to some of your project descriptions, as I felt that some of the insights could help you frame either a better argument or a better research design moving forward, or at least, consider some new angles or problems or challenges which you may not have thought about before. All right, so I'd say that you should listen because often what we see in the research, or what we expect to be enough when we propose a study about a South Asian context is not enough for a reviewer. It often requires triangulating methods, so proposing or testing the same claims with more than one set of data and methods. It requires creativity and it requires robustness. All of those are things that come into play when you want to work from noisy data to interpretation, the next frontier. So these are the study contexts I've worked with. They're all over the map. A number of South Asian countries are also included. And here's what I think is your shopping list as a SICSS candidate, SICSS attendee. this is possibly what you think you require as in order to be a successful computational social scientist. You want to be able to use different APIs, whether they be in Python or R. You want to do text as data analysis. You want to apply it to train deep learning models and finally visualize it so that your paper is crisp and beautiful. Great. This is the for one and only time I'm going to use a meme of our Indian Prime Minister. And I chose this for a reason. I chose this because of what it represents. The caption in Punjabi reads Sab Changa Si. And the literal translation is expected to be all is well. But here's the challenge with South Asian languages. Even Google Translate fails a lot of the time because that's not the actual translation. So we have a meme that is based on a line that the Prime Minister said, which is actually inaccurately translated. And it has other kinds of problems as well because it doesn't reflect reality. And that's the kind of problem that South Asian data or South Asian social media data is often replete with. When you see South Asian language, having resources to use it, to translate it, and to work with it, they are often limited. And that is one of the challenges that we have to overcome as computational social scientists, right? Other challenges also happen, and these are questions I want to prepare you for, both as you do your presentations later today, these and also when you finally do up your research for a journal or a conference. The kind of questions you're going to get are going to be about the source of your data. They're going to be about the representativeness of the data. And unfortunately, just having cool methods or using machine learning or deep learning or having a really cool visualization is not going to solve a flawed study design. There are other questions that you need to think about as well. Is there a benchmark? How do you make sure, or how do you show that the quality of your work is good enough? Have you tried more than one method? What is the unit of analysis? And very importantly, the so what question. In our hurry to put together projects, often we forget what this project is actually contributing. And I know that some of us roll our eyes, the empiricists and people who have devoted their lives to looking at data and understanding data, roll our eyes at the reviewer two's incessant questioning of our theoretical contribution. But I believe there is something to be learned from their insistence or their fanaticism as well. There's something to be learned, not to be taken too seriously. So those were the skills that I think you want, but what I think you need is to know your data, a bottom-up approach to working with social media data. And I just had a lovely holiday in Greece, and one part of my holiday blew my mind, where at the ancient temple in Delphi, where the oracle used to sit and predict people's futures, which is now something we do as computational social scientists. What was inscribed in the entrance of the temple wall was "Know yourself," Nathi Sieton. Probably mispronounced, but it's okay. What that means is know yourself. So the lady who is predicting the whole world's futures is telling people that they need to know themselves, is telling people to look within. And that is something as computational social scientists we should adopt as well. We should really know our data. Because time is short, I'm going to talk about only a few aspects of how to know our data. But basically, the skills I think you need are to understand and to tackle a mean reviewer, are to understand what is your unit of analysis. And here we're going to talk a little bit about Sandra's keynote as well, if there's time. What you can study about your unit of analysis and what is the research gap. But these are important links in a longer process. And the first part of the process is going to be to know your data. to filter, categorize, benchmark, repeat as necessary, to identify dimensions of similarity and differences, and to finalize the problem statement. I've underlined only filter and benchmark because those are two of the examples that I'll show today as a part of this talk. And now, of course, the title of my talk is the next frontier. So it's not enough to just have clean data or process data. We have to think about the next frontier. And the next frontier for computational social scientists is to take describing data forward into modeling, predictive performance, and forecasting. That's the next frontier for computational social science, for social science in general, and especially for computational social science of South Asian communities, where a lot of the research is still, because of the complexity of the data, often relies more heavily on describing data, I'd say mine included, than possibly forecasting. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is so. Any questions up till this point? Otherwise, yeah, okay, I'll keep going. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I am monitoring it on the side. Okay, no questions yet. Good. So as I was saying, motivating a good research problem is only a part of the link between knowing your data and moving on to the next frontier. And I'm going to talk a little bit about especially filtering and benchmarking in the South Asian context, and predictive performance and forecasting as well. Other examples of other stages on the way are going to be in the slide deck, and I'll share the link after this. Okay, so these are the study contexts that I'm going to be talking about through my own work. Again, I'm not the only one working in these working on computational social science in these countries, but my work is the one I know best of all. I've put the papers relevant to the studies that I'll be discussing at this QR code. You can get to it later, and I'll also, of course, share the slide deck. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is filtering your data as when you're studying South Asian communities. An interesting problem occurs when you need to shortlist the data you want to use, especially because you're living in a context or you're living in a country where people have developed their own interesting type of English. So I want to talk a little bit about my work with this recent paper, which was out in 2021. This study examines the effects of threat perceptions, consumptive and expressive use of social media, and political trust on attitudes against immigrants in Singapore. It comprises two studies. Again, I'm going to remind you that triangulation is often an expectation. Study 1 is a survey of 310 students. Study 2 is a content analysis of their social media posts. Okay, so what was the challenge here? The challenge here was that language hinders generalizability of state-of-the-art approaches. Now, this is a typical post that was a part of the data set, which was collected. And in order to measure targeted prejudice in posts, you first had to identify that this post is referencing an immigrant. Unless you understand the local slang in Singapore, in which "Ah Tiong" is actually a derogatory reference to a mainland Chinese person, you're not going to know that this is relevant for your data or not. Also, if you're like me and you're born and brought up in India, you do not have insight into this slang, right? So you are forced, or you are obligated, in fact, to work with people who understand the context better. Now, in terms of your projects, I'd say that this, considering this issue, that you have limited information, or you may not have full information about the slang or the use of language by your community, is relevant to those of you who are proposing text mining studies of attitudes. There are a few papers that reflect text that involve text mining, and specifically the ones that involve study of attitudes might need to consider how the language of your population, whether it be a particular ethnic community or a particular demographic, may have a certain different kind of vocabulary, and what you can do to consider that. So a possible approach that I followed in this paper, and you may want to think about, is to create a custom data filter to curate or crowdsource a lexicon. So what was done in this case, for instance, was that let me see if okay, it's not mentioned. So what we did in this case was that we got the people or a broader set of people who were involved in the survey. So before the survey was actually done, a different crowdsourcing task was completed by a similar population, in which they were asked to share keywords or share words that were used to reference foreigners. So what are the slang words used by the local population or the specific demographic to mention foreigners? Now that was used as the selection criteria to understand or to identify or to filter the data, basically. I hope that makes sense. If you want to talk about a population, you should know or you should understand the vocabulary that they use. And you can only understand the vocabulary that they use if you're either a part of it or you ask them. All right. So the lesson here is that language hinders generalizability of state-of-the-art approaches. I can't just go in here and use a standard English-based model often because of the context. All right. The next example or the next case study I want to talk about is benchmarking your data. For this, I want to talk about a study of social media posts from China. This particular paper, which is referenced here at the bottom, studies linguistic differences in the experiences and expressions of stress in urban-rural China from Weibo posts of over 65,000 users across 329 counties using hierarchical mixed effects models. Right. So this paper is basically a comparative analysis of urban and rural expressions of stress. In talking about the theoretical contribution here, what we tried to motivate, or the reason we motivated such an analysis, because we wanted to see whether digital inequality, that is the differences in the access and the opportunities to use the internet and the skills to use the internet amongst the rural and the urban populations could affect their social media use and their expressions on social media, right? So what was the problem here? Now, in order to say something representative about the rural and urban populations in China, we would need representatives we would need a representative population from both the urban and the rural sectors, right? But of course, because urban people use the internet more, this was an imbalanced data set. We had 600,000 posts from 67,000 users with a lot of messages, but overwhelmingly, most of the data was from urban areas. And most of the people were urban as well. Now, understanding this study and its methods is useful for those projects which involve generalizing a smaller sample to a population. For instance, you run a small survey. Even if you're doing just a survey, one of the things that you want to do is to have a nationally representative sample. And if you do not have a nationally representative sample, then you need to reweight your existing sample so that the lesser representative populations receive different weights or are more important than the ones who are represented more. So this is an idea or a consideration that you must think about if you're proposing that your work generalizes to a large population, and also if you're running surveys. In this case, we had the situation where we had 15,000 rural users and 51,000 urban users respectively. And of course, our objective was to compare the language of rural and urban users. So what we did in this case was we built on previous methods that I've mentioned in my methods slide to match the census demographics to the social media demographics that we had using post stratification. It's an existing method that you can read about more. I just want to make you aware of such methods and that they exist, and your reviewer is going to be annoying and ask you for them. And after that, what you do is when you run the regression models, you include variables that account for location context. So if some people share if some people are from the same locality, it's likely to affect their outcomes. So you include those variables in your regression models. All right. Okay, next thing, moving on to the next frontier, which is to predict and forecast things. This is a paper that came out in 2019, and in fact, it's based on data from 2014. I think it's a good example or a good hint into what are the kind of problems that could be faced with social media data. But of course, since then, the problems have multiplied. So this particular study introduces and evaluates the robustness of different volumetric, sentiment, and social network approaches to predict the elections in 3 Asian countries. All tweets were collected for all candidates for all countries between the nomination date and the voting day. So we try to keep it systematic that way. For 14 parties in Malaysia, 15 in India, and 11 in Pakistan. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about the Pakistan results here, but again, this is a interesting aspect of South Asian communities and countries as well, where we don't have two-party systems, and that creates unique problems for that creates unique problems or opportunities where we have to be more creative when we are talking about polarization, for instance, or any kind of political opinions. We have to be creative when we try to generalize ideas and studies from the West into our contexts. So this is an excerpt of the paper where the goal was to predict the outcome of elections. What we compared against was against previous election results and opinion polls. So here, the first 4 rows are what previous election results and opinion polls said would be the outcome of the election and how wrong they got it. So MAE, you understand, mean absolute error, root mean square error. So you see that the most accurate out of these was the SDPI, which was conducted 1 year prior to the election, which was in, I believe, May 2014. And the last row has the predictions based on Twitter, where the sample size was 1.1 million tweets. And the mean absolute error, RMSE, is comparable with IRI, which was the next best poll, right? Now, why is this relevant? This is relevant for those of you who are, first of all, looking at social media for prediction and are also trying to triangulate survey findings with social media found data. So there are a couple of you who are looking at surveys or survey experiments as your project. And if you submit that, it could benefit you to also think about how social media data can complement the main trends that you are suggesting with your analysis. All right, but you have to consider that social media trends can be gamed. For instance, just having a large number of posts about a certain political party a few days before the election could make it seem that one party is more popular than the other, and so on. So there are temporal trends which need to be considered. There are troll farms and click farms that are set up by political parties in order to trump up their the attention that they get on social media. Considering that or keeping all of that in view requires some creative processes, which this paper talks about. And this is like a summary of the different findings that we had in this paper and the insights from different approaches. So if you are planning to work on a recommendation problem using social media data, you might find this table useful, which basically provides insights from different approaches that are used to measure trends in social media data. There's a justification of why they might work well or why they might be chosen in the first place, the main benefit that they have, and the main challenge. For instance, in this paper, the main recommendation that we made was that network approaches, especially for Pakistan, network approaches or social network analysis metrics were the most effective because they are more difficult to game. A connected community reflects a stronger voter base than isolated tweets, and it removes the overestimation and underestimation effects if there are um, too many tweets or there are too little tweets. It removes those effects a little bit, reduces the errors caused by those edge cases. A diffuse network means greater outreach and greater electoral success. So the centrality measures that we were using were very useful to understand how the community how the social media community was discussing the election. Of course, it is still computationally expensive, and recently click farms have wisened up to this and often talk to each other because that is counted in the social network metrics. Right. Another thing that we used in this paper was to dampen temporal spikes by reweighting observations. So observations that were closer to the election date we weighted them higher than the others, and so on. So you might find this paper useful if you at all want to use social media metrics. All right. And moving on to the last study that I want to talk about today, which is in India. This is a working paper that is available at SSRN. This study proposes a multi-method framework to examine online mobilization by large Facebook groups protesting a law by the Indian government. So I offer topic modeling, predictive analysis, and social network analysis to characterize the roles played by these Facebook groups in mobilizing a protest. Okay. I look at data from December 2019 to March 2020. There were a lot of issues with cleaning up this data, but today I'm going to talk about just one of them. And it's relevant for those of you, although actually I didn't see any projects that specifically mentioned time series analysis. Maybe the attrition one, maybe the academic attrition one would go into this direction. But it's relevant for those of you who want to consider looking into causal analysis, forecasting, or time series analysis using social media data. What you see on your screen is a red line and a lot of vertical black lines. Now, the red line is the volume of social media posts that I collected, and the vertical black lines are the offline events that were happening. So imagine that the objective is to predict offline protest action from online posts. Okay, imagine that that is the goal, and what you would want is based on the volume of posts you predict when there's going to be the next big protest, for instance. But here's the kicker. When you look more carefully at the events that are occurring, it might give you insight into why your trends look the way they do. Okay. An excited person like me who wants to quickly get into some interesting causal analysis or time series analysis might see this. Oh my God, 50,000 to 100,000 people participated in an anti CAA rally in Kochi. I wonder if I could predict that based on the previous volume of tweets. That's okay, this is Facebook post, but I wonder if I could predict that. That's so cool. Now, the problem occurs is that when you look more carefully at all the events that were occurring offline, on 19 December, the internet was suspended in one part of India. That means that the data that you're seeing doesn't include the data posted by the protesters anyway. What that means is what you see here now starts to make more sense, which is the internet was suspended and suddenly there was a huge drop in the number of social media posts. And then you see that a lot of people participated, which is completely incongruent, right? You'd expect that if attention is dropping, then protest would not happen. But you see the opposite happening because even though there was a clampdown on the internet, somehow people managed to mobilize in a different part of India. But still, you see how the online trends are not reflective of offline realities, right? And the reason is that social media access can be turned off. So social media access can be turned off. So your online data is not complete data. It may not be reflective of what's happening offline. And you need to be very careful when you propose a research question which claims that online events are related to offline events. In this situation, what I would recommend is to change the question rather than claiming causality. Stake a claim about missing protesters. Who went missing? uh, what uh, what Facebook group stopped posting all of a sudden, and what could be the reasons or what could be the variables predictive of those outcomes. Or you change the direction, you examine the impact of offline events on the online. What I ended up doing in this particular working paper was to do an intergroup comparison of just online posts rather than focus on the online offline relationship, because as you can see, uh, it is so contested. All right, so I hope that's insightful. In summary, I talked about a few things today. I talked about knowing your data and using that to take you to the next frontier. In the middle, there is an important middle step called finalizing the problem statement. Since we have time, I will go into that a little bit. So you have to know your data and you have to move to the next frontier. But first, you need a good problem statement in order to do so. Wait. Don't see all of this yet. Yeah, I want to harken back to the opening keynote by Sandra, where she talked about what you can do when you look at social media data. And she talked about 3 different levels of analysis that you could do. You could talk about individual exposure, you can talk about networks, and then you can talk about aggregated patterns of collective attention. Now, those are the ideas I'd like you to think about when you're finalizing your problem statement. In order to do so, you need to consider what is the unit of your analysis. Are you going to look at people level data or group level data or community level data or region level data or country level data? Once you identify what is going to be the unit of your analysis, you need to think about what's going to be changing. Are you going to be looking at the same person over different times? Are you going to be looking at different groups against each other, different communities against each other, or how they coordinate with each other? Or the same thing but at the region level? At once you get to the region level, it would a region or country level, it would make sense to try to narrow the scope a little bit. All of this seems really high up in the air when I talk about it, but what I'm hoping is that you can consider the research projects that you are formulating right now and see how this framework could help you finalize a more meaningful question and a more meaningful research design based on what your unit of analysis is and what you can actually do with it. All right. So this is the middle step that connects the first step with the others. I'm gonna go back to where I was, which was here, right? This is the middle step that connects knowing your data with taking it to the next frontier, is to finalize a problem statement that is cognizant of your data, of the dimensions of similarity and differences that it has, and ties that into meaningful hypotheses, models, or forecasting. Okay, these are once again the papers that this talk used, and they're all available at this QR code. And when I talk about the next frontier in South Asian computational social science, actually the pioneers of it are in this room today. The papers that you are going to design and work on now and in the coming months, they are going to be the future of South Asian computational social science. So it's been an honor to meet you. I hope this helped you a little bit, and I hope you are able to come up with your own set of recommendations or playbook in order to make the best use of the data and the challenges that South Asian social media has. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take questions at this point.
Thanks, Kokil.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I was just thanking you for the talk and for being the first speaker to stick to the time limit. So, yeah.
Sure, my pleasure.
So we open up for questions in both. I think there are a couple. Okay, there's the room or in the Zoom.
Yep, happy to take questions.
If Faye has a question. No?
I can ask something more general, I think.
All right. You want to
Sure.
introduce yourself?
I am a first year assistant from the business school at NUS. I think one of the things that when I started to work with students on specifically projects that involve both technical dimensions and something that you have to think about research question and theoretical competency, right? A lot of times I think you have an advantage in terms of your background, that you're both very technical, but you're also able to understand the contributions in social sciences and related aspects of research projects. But as going forward, sometimes I wonder, like, what if I cannot be the person who's the most technical in the team? What would be the best approach I take in terms of what techniques I learn and the type of advice I can give to people I work with?
That's a great question, and of course, it's something that we're all faced with. Are we a Methodist, or are we a theorist? I'd say that you're in a nice position where you recognize what your assets are, and you recognize the directions that you need to take your students in. And what you can do is to read and to understand how the kind of papers that you want to write are framing these research problems that you're doing. So what I would suggest is that now that you've recognized where you could work on things, which is both either in the methods part or in the theory part, is to look really deeply at the successful papers which have managed to bring these aspects together, and to see how you could emulate the same quality of arguments in your own work. And that could be your contribution. I didn't start off and I didn't have a training in theory at all. It's all work, or it's all ideas that I've picked up in my time after my PhD. So what helps is to read a lot. Just read papers from your discipline, read papers from your journals, and use those to formulate or help your team make really strong arguments. Because no matter how good the analysis is, it's the writing that actually makes or breaks a paper.
That reminds me of a kind of a related question. I was having a discussion with Rima that there is a differences in our discipline where most of our projects take about 5 to 8 years to get published from the start of it. And which means that a lot of the projects you have to just call it off at some point. How do you make those decisions, if any? Like things that you think, because there's a lot of front end investment in terms, especially if you're using creating your own data set, looking for a data set online using social media data set. When do you, or what are some of the characteristics when you realize that it's like, okay, I'm not going forward with this project anymore?
Yeah, I haven't done that too often. So that is, if you figure out how to pull the plug, let me know. Um, I'd say I basically track my projects, and if something has been sitting on yellow for more than a year, it's probably time to think about whether it's ever going to be an active project or whether you should shift it down. So I basically create, in a very algorithmic sense, I create a pipeline and I try to stick to it as much as possible and prioritize the work that will get me promoted over the work that my heart wants me to do.
What did they end up in yellow?
Sorry?
What did they end up in yellow, turning yellow?
Like I said, you just monitor it, you track it, you vent at your colleagues, and if nothing's coming out of it, then you take it up. Then you take it up with your conscience. Can you live with not having that paper on your CV, or if you think it's really important, if you think it's something that is invaluable to your profile, then it might make sense to put everything aside and push forward. So at some point, you have to trust your instinct.
I'll leave the time for more hopeful younger generation now.
Sure.
Any other questions?
A couple of them. Probably use this, you know. We have a
Yeah, we have a mic. Kokil, give us a second. We are switching to mic.
Okay.
And this is Ife speaking.
So if I want to match survey data with, for example, social media data or Google Trends, it might, when we talk about like regional, so sometimes I think if we want to match these two data sets, I often need to rely on the survey.
okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I feel like I often need to rely on the survey data set to get an anchor. Yeah, to get an anchor for my further analysis, right? Since I need to compare this to. So one thing I like about this social media, this computational social science data set is that you can go as close as you want. You can go to the county level, but usually those nationwide survey data sets, they won't go that deep. They're just like nationally representative. And yeah, so I wonder, like, do you have some thoughts on that? Yeah, also.
I think there are a bunch of data sets that are at the county level. I mean, not for South Asian countries, unfortunately. For those, we have Intrepid. Some of my Intrepid colleagues are working on collecting that data. So with reference to South Asian communities specifically, getting access to, you know, location level data, as you said, is harder. Nationally representative surveys are not as easily accessible as those in the US. So I agree that's a problem. While you while having money is one solution, and collecting your own data and building your own nationally representative surveys is one solution to it. But until you can do so, it's still a good idea to work on whatever is available. Or for instance, in the paper that I showed about Pakistan, where we were benchmarking, we used polls that were reported on the same problem in the news. So it might make sense to see what the news media in this country is talking about, to see if there are other you know, institutional or agency based survey data sets available, if not those by the government, and to find PIs who are working with in these contexts with and creating their own data sets and seeing if they could help you out. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Sure.
Can Brad get a question? No?
Yeah.
What else? Oh, yeah. That is the microphone.
Okay. Hi, my name is Gerard, and I'm
Hi.
a research fellow with the Social Service Research Center at Dean's Office in NUS.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I really learned a lot, the practical issues and real life, real context issues. I think that was very helpful for me. My question is probably a very practical one. I really like the idea that we have, and in my own work, I really realized the need to form a local corpus in order to make comparison, like your whole, just now you talk about the racist attitudes, the Akyong word. How do you, I mean, you don't have this in a Western corpus. So my question is very practical. How do you exactly go about creating something like that? For instance, does it cost a lot of money? How big a sample size do you require in order to form a corpus to compare or to derive your dictionary whatsoever? So very practical. I would like to create something like that, but I really do not have an idea how. Who do you select to be? Yeah. And then the
Great
second
question. Okay, let's take your second question after the first question, otherwise I'll forget it. In the paper that that I talked about, because the study was based on students, a student population, the first study to crowdsource that lexicon was also collected from a student population. So that's my answer to you. If you're studying a certain population, then use them to use them to for your crowdsourcing and to get this lexicon. What is the size required? Actually, not as big as you would think. You can of course read the paper. It again depends on your context. What studies like, what reviewers like is if something is validated, not that if it is collected from a large set of people. You don't need 1,000 people to crowdsource this. If you get 50 people to do it and another 50 people whose results match exactly with the first 50. That is, replication is more important than size when you are creating a resource such as a crowdsourced lexicon. And anyway, this is going to be the preliminary thing that is going to anchor your work. So the N is not important. The rigor and the replicability of your lexicon is more important.
Cool. And just one more question about that. In terms of deriving the dictionary, do you use like qualitative methods to get a subject expert to analyze the word to derive the keywords or whatever, or is it still computational methods to do it?
Absolutely. Again, it depends on your context. I've worked with psychologists who are, of course, subject matter experts, and sometimes they sit together and curate these words, or they would evaluate these words. In working with a project related to prejudice, involving people who work with this data, who understand the language of it, who are qualitative researchers, helps a lot in ensuring the standard is maintained. So yes, I would highly recommend having an interdisciplinary team which involves subject matter experts, and a second round in which the crowdsourced stuff from the population is reviewed at least by experts in some manner.
Right. Thanks. The second
Sure.
question, Facebook post, and I saw in that paper, the Singapore paper with Ahmed, who is the first author, the one of Singapore, and you actually ask the student. I think they are students, but you actually ask the students if you can access their Facebook posts.
Yes.
So you got permission, and then you extract their Facebook posts.
Yes.
Because my work involves social service agencies, and a lot of the agencies have their posts on Facebook rather than Twitter or Reddit. So that is a layer of difficulty to access. I was really wondering a lot about asking the permission. Should I do it? because most of the posts are probably public. Two is how confident, I don't know, I just feel the lack of confidence that they will agree to let me actually use their post. So
I mean, I obviously can't answer for them. I would say in Singapore, and running such studies in Singapore for non-student population is increasingly hard. I'd say you should apply for IRB approval first, then speak to these agencies, or speak to, and you may not, if you have CrowdTangle access, then you'd be able to access public posts in any case, but public posts by the administrators, not by the users or the members of these pages. So there are additional safeguards now put in place by Facebook to protect the members of these different Facebook communities. So you would have to, you can still access the post posted by users if you subscribe to a ridiculously expensive service such as iSentia, ISENTIA. It's really good, but really ridiculously expensive. So I'd say it's not impossible, but it's worthwhile thinking about whether it should be done or not. Can your research question be answered without compromising the identity, or without this data that involves taking the posts of people, of unsuspecting people? If your research questions can be answered without, infringing on someone's privacy, then just do it some other way, man.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Further questions? Okay, so take it. 11 o'clock. So we woke you up pretty early, Kokil. So we won't keep
Of
you.
course, it's my pleasure. It was so great to see you all. Thank you so much for your attention.
And to think that she actually went through all the keynote videos while on holiday is kind of crazy. But yeah, thanks.
All right. Thanks. Bye bye.
Make this
See you
video
guys.
available hopefully soon.
Sure.
On somewhere on social media, right?
Okay. All right. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.